I'm going to start. Great. So we will move on. So covering today's topics, we're going to have a look at understanding sensory processing and self-regulation, and then looking into self-regulation, what sensory processing is, the impact on every day, sensory differences within schools, and then looking a little bit more into zones of regulation and how that could look in secondary, and also Level Up, which is a different program that you may or may not know, and then some general regulation tools also, and then time for questions within that as well. So I can't work out seeing the chat at the moment. Let me see if I can open it in a different way. Here we go, there's the chat. Great. So using your chat function, can you pop in any sort of, or you can unmute yourself if you'd like, what is self-regulation? We use lots of different terms when we talk about regulation. We talk about regulation, self-regulation, feelings, emotions. There's so many things that we use to sort of describe what we mean by self-regulation. Sometimes we also think about sensory elements. So yeah, if you can pop into the chat anything that you think links to sort of self-regulation and what that is, and then also maybe what you do to self-regulate. So what is it that you kind of do in your time, often it's in our evenings, our weekends, sometimes it's actually in school, we need to take a moment, maybe it's a cup of tea. So what is self-regulation? I know for myself, yeah, amazing. So self-regulation, feeling balanced, exactly. So that sense of balance is such a lovely word when we talk about regulation, because it's, sometimes we have enough, sometimes we don't have enough. I love that concept of balance, because, sometimes if you pitch that old-fashioned weight scale, it goes up and down. That's the same with our regulation. And things we can do is exercise. You might be someone that goes for a run, you might be someone that needs to watch TV or have a bath or something at the end of a hard day. So we all have different ways that we regulate. So let's move on to the next bit. So regulation comes in three parts, really. You've got external regulation, and that's when you think about a toddler or a newborn baby. They really need that mother, father, the caregiver to support with how to regulate. So that's being able to sort of use somebody else's direction, get that support. They need intervention from an outside source to support regulation. Co-regulation, when we sort of move on to that next area, that's more when you find somebody else helps you maintain that regulation, but there's also some element of being able to do it themselves. So there's a little bit of internal regulation starting, and then needing to look to that outside person for that little bit more support, but not quite as reliant as maybe thinking about the newborn baby style of external regulation. And then you have self-regulation, and that's sort of that end point in this sort of visual here is about being able to regulate themselves. So that can sort of result in you need to build up to that, obviously going through the other stages, because you learn from the other person, the outside source, in how to regulate yourself best. So it's sort of the next level, it's like a staircase. So yeah, self-regulation is the ability to understand and manage your own alertness, behaviour and reaction to respond in an appropriate way. And it's that appropriate way that we really talk about when we think about lots of our children, is they may think that they're regulating, but is it appropriate? How does it support? That then goes into lots of more sort of levels when you think about things like self-harm, mental health challenges. That's a way of regulating, but actually, is it in an appropriate way? Is it in a healthy way? So we sort of learn these ways of regulation, but as I say, not all of them, particularly when we're thinking about your age group. Actually, children with, and young people have learned ways to regulate, but is that a way that's an appropriate way for them, that's safe and healthy? So when a person is able to self-regulate, they are able to do all of these things. So they can communicate how they're feeling, they're calm, they're organised, and that's particularly in a stressful situation. They can cheer themselves up if they've had a disappointment or a challenge. You can understand. They can understand when they are experiencing sensory overload and make adjustments if they need to. And when it's appropriate to cheer or shout, be excited or be quiet. So that kind of understanding of what's appropriate in the environments that you're within. To be able to self-regulate, you actually need these 4 elements. These are all sort of parts of the brain and the body, and they all work together to help you build these self-regulation skills. You've got your sensory processing, which we'll go into in more depth. We'll go into all of these in more depth, but your executive functioning, your emotional regulation, and social cognition. So all of those sort of 4 areas work together. So in terms of sensory processing, you've got this cycle that happens here. So that's making sense of the information that you receive through your senses, organizing that information and producing a purposeful action or behavior. So for instance, you get a sensory input. So that's that sort of the sensory input side. Something happens, your receptors and your sort of sensory system picks up information from your environment or from your body. That then comes round, we start processing that information. That helps when we talk about processing, it's us organizing it, being able to interpret it, and then and relate it to experiences that we've had. And then we respond. And that's based on that ability to process, based on experiences that we've previously had. So it's this sort of ongoing cycle and that happens within us all of the time. If you think of a time possibly when that wheel hasn't worked as smoothly. So for me, the other day, the underground is a really good example here for me. And I know lots of us as well, but the other day I was going into London. Normally it's it's not that busy, but I'd had 2, and I, used to the trains, used to all of that. It's my learned experience is that I can interpret and deal with the busyness, the noise, the not getting a seat, the heat, all of these things. I can deal with those things, they're experiences I've had, and I can respond in an appropriate way. But last weekend, I think it was, I was going into London. I'd had 3 trains cancelled. One train, one of those 3 was diverted. It was just such a difficult journey. Everyone around me was building frustration. You could see that there was just such irritation on the platforms, and it was a really hot day, and that cycle began to work less well. I could feel myself not being able to regulate, not being able to think where I needed to go. How was I going to manage that journey that was starting to get more difficult? Which route would I take? And I was getting more hot, I was getting frustrated, I was quicker to be irritated. So that sort of sensory process is impacted by the experience that we're having and what's going on in that environment. So being underground with lots of frustrated people was really impacting my ability to make decisions in that and know, right, am I waiting for this next train? Am I going home? Or am I going to try and get a bus? And it slows down our ability to do the next thing, which is our executive functioning. So my ability to make that choice was impacted by all of that sort of overwhelm that was happening. So your executive functioning is the cognitive process involved in the concise control of thoughts and action. So this sort of comprises of our working memory, our attention, our flexibility. It's the sort of frontal cortex of your brain. It's that ability to make decisions. And if you think about when you arrive at work in the morning, your executive functioning is on sort of overdrive. You're thinking about the planning that you've set for that day. You're thinking about what you weren't managed to finish yesterday, what you're going to have to bring into today. You're then met in the corridor by other people, other teachers asking questions, and your working memory, and you're having to sort of use that executive functioning all of the time and very quickly. And that sort of relies on our emotional regulation. So our emotional regulation is the process of controlling your emotional reaction in order to meet your goal. It's that sort of the brainstem part, the reptilian part of the brain that sort of triggers this fight, flight, response and freeze response. And so if you think about that busy Monday morning where you've got all of these demands, actually that fight, flight, freeze response could be triggering. You could be thinking, oh, if only it was Sunday morning, not Monday morning. And your ability to kind of cope with those challenges can be impacted. So for me, if you think about that tube example, actually, my fight, flight, freeze response was going. There were people knocking into me. It was starting to sort of get a bit hustle and bustly down there, but more than the usual, there was frustration, and it was, didn't feel like a pleasant environment. So that caused me to be more on hyper alert. So but for all of us throughout the day, our regulation system goes on like a wave. I really like thinking about it in a wave because we have peaks and troughs through the day. So sometimes we might be feeling a little bit more sort of stimulated, and other times actually our brain isn't working so well. And that executive functioning part isn't sort of moving as quickly. So if you think about, I don't know, maybe a walk to work, a walk to school, and you step out into the road and you haven't seen that there's somebody coming the other way. That's that sudden response, that sort of freeze. Hopefully it's a flight, hopefully you step back. Or if you think there's, that experience when you you think there's an extra step, you step off the stairs and you think there's one more, or one less than there is, and there's that real jerk in your body. That's that real fight flight response kicking in. And when we go fully into fight, those examples I've just given you are really short-lived experiences. They're really sort of they're burst ones. But what can happen if you're in a prolonged experience of fight, flight, freeze, is you go into the sort of more panic, the anxiety, and it's a longer experience. And that what happens is your executive function actually shuts down. That part of the brain shuts down. It kind of bypasses that area, and you move more into the reptilian, this fight, flight, freeze section of the brain. And that's really based on our caveman time, so that the blood flow is then moving to your body to help you run, to help you sort of move into that fight reaction, rather than thinking and sort of wasting energy and time on memory and all of the other bits of our brain. Then you've got the social cognition. So this is the ability to understand what others' thoughts and feelings and experiences, and how that may differ to you. Being able to sort of be critical and understand the social norms, what's happening around you, and that helps guide your behaviour and others' behaviour in what's required from sort of social expectation. So we're going to watch this short video now on what strong self-regulation skills are.
Successful people have strong self-regulation skills. They use them every day. The skills help them consciously direct, sustain, and shift their attention when necessary. They help them monitor and manage their thoughts, behavior, and emotions in this complicated world of ours. 3 of the self-regulation skills, known as executive function skills, are cognitive. These are used to monitor and manage attention, thoughts, and behavior. A 4th self-regulation skill is the ability to monitor and manage emotions. These skills are not inborn, but they are teachable, and we depend on them every day, especially when the going gets rough. Just like adults, when students are upset or angry, it's hard for them to use their executive function skills because their strong emotions take over. This can also make it difficult for them to listen, remember rules, and stay focused on learning. So, learning to monitor and manage emotions allows students to recognize their strong feelings and use strategies to calm down. Then, they can use their executive function skills again. And research shows students with strong self-regulation skills have higher academic achievement and are less likely to act in impulsive or aggressive ways, or to withdraw when overwhelmed. They're also more likely to get along well with others and have strong social skills. Students with poor self-regulation skills can have emotional and behavioral problems and academic trouble, and are more likely to be expelled from school, starting as early as preschool. When students learn and practice self-regulation skills, they can build academic achievement, social competence, and positive growth throughout their lives.
Okay, so if we have a bit more of a look into the sensory element of those sort of four sections. So if we think about how the sensory system is created and what sensory processing is in a little bit more detail. So sensory processing is the effective regulation and accurate interpretation of sensory input in the environment, and environment includes our body. It's the way our brain receives, organizes, and responds to sensory input in order to behave in a meaningful and consistent manner. And it's I sort of said at the beginning, it's very much learnt behavior, and that's then put into our memories. So we lay down lots of experiences. So if we look at this picture of this baby, that baby's senses are receiving lots of information. Their brain doesn't yet have memories for all of the information that it's necessarily receiving. So to be able to sort of interpret and organize that information, we need those memories. So when a baby is looking at something new, or like in this photograph, they've got a toy or anything really, it will they'll sort of explore it. That can be exploring it through touch, so that tactile element, that's in their hands, maybe on their face, rubbing it in different areas of their body, putting it in their mouth, seeing how it tastes, again how it feels, looking at it, smelling it. There's lots of sort of experiences that sensory experience that baby will and young toddler will sort of seek from any object or activity that they're doing. And it's a really sort of unique time where the brain is laying down these memories and these experiences. And they could be really positive, they could be getting lots of kind of nice things that they're enjoying from that experience, but equally it actually may be building sort of aversion, so not liking that feeling of velvet's quite a good example of adults who actually maybe don't like that sensation of velvet, and where that feeling then, that change in that feeling comfortable and soothed by that, where that then turns into actually being a bit of an icky feeling. So these kind of our senses and our early experiences are really sort of interlinked into how we respond to different feelings, and joy. So certain smells and things we like can bring us sort of experiences and memories as well. You can kind of really hold memories in terms of smell, or I know like your grandparents' house, you kind of have those sensations that you remember that smell. If you think about it on sort of like a more advanced level, possibly a chef is a good example. So a chef would be able to determine a range of herbs and smells in a way that you or I would not have that skill. I might be able to recognize that that's oregano, that's paprika, but going that bit further, a chef will have learned that their memory will recognize and know the name, what to then do with that herb. That's their sensory experience has been built sort of more on their experiences of that. So when we start thinking about our senses, and I sort of gave a little bit away there, but we've got various senses. There are sort of 5 that we all are really comfortable with, but there's actually 3 more. So there are 8 senses in total. And these 8 senses, as I say, are based on feedback from our memories. So you've got the 5 senses that we're all sort of really comfortable with. That's your sense of smell, the sense of touch, the sense of taste, sound, auditory, and visual. You've then got the proprioceptive sense, and that's very much feedback from your muscles and your joints, and that sort of gives you your body awareness. It gives you that sense of space. It's also what you, again, based on learned behaviour, you know that picking up your cup, your cup of tea requires a certain amount of force. We all know if you then pick up something that you think is going to be heavier or lighter than it is, and you get that sort of strange sensation where either it's a lot easier or a lot harder than you think, and that's your proprioceptive system working or not working in that instance. You've then got the vestibular system. That is your sense of balance. It's the ability to sort of detect movement within your body, and it's also your spatial orientation, so what's sort of around you and how you're moving. I really like describing this one. If you think about when you're in a lift, you're not getting any other information from your other senses. So in terms of like a window, unless it's a glass lift, but you're in a lift, you're not seeing the fact that you're moving, but you can really feel, you can sense that you're moving, and that's based on, you have some fluid and little hairs based in your ear, and the movement that you're experiencing sort of is detected in that point, and that's your vestibular system. And then the final 8th sense that we're starting to sort of talk a lot more about now is the interoception system, and that is your sort of awareness of what's happening in your internal body. So that is, if you think about being, are you too hot? Are you cold? Are you hungry? Do you need the toilet? I really like, again, explaining this. If you think about your stomach, so you've got a feeling in your tummy, and you may recognize that actually that is because you're really hungry, and your memory tells you that you've not had breakfast yet. So that feeling in your stomach is most likely that you're hungry. It could also be that you need the toilet. It could also actually be that you're feeling anxious, or you've got butterflies. So there's different it's a sensation in your stomach, but you, based on your memory, you're able to interpret the feeling as being slightly different to give you an indicator on what that sense is, which is quite an advanced skill really, and something that we'll maybe come on to sort of talk about, that actually when we talk about sensory differences and processing more challenges, it's these senses that are more difficult to detect. So you may have children that that aren't necessarily very good at recognizing when they're hot and sweaty, or when actually they should have a drink of water, or whether they're feeling anxious, or do they need the toilet, or are they hungry. These senses are sort of areas that we really start seeing those challenges in. So if we talk a little bit more about sensory differences in autism. So back in 2013, the DSM-5 included sensory responses as part of the diagnostic manual. So people with autism it's now sort of talked about as a huge element, these challenges with sensory processing. So just in terms of what the research is saying, so there was one study that showed 80% of adults with autism reported challenges with sensory processing, and then the percent of children with ASD and sensory processing issues is reported to be around 69 to 95, depending on the study. That depends slightly on the study size. It also depends on what they're sort of specifying as sensory processing issues. Some were a lot more sort of descriptive over what was it being a challenge. So sensory processing doesn't impact every autistic person, but it's a challenge that a lot of people with autism are sort of reporting, and we see that it's an impact for them. And just to sort of be clear, as we're talking about senses and then sensory processing, it's not actually an issue with the sense itself. So it's not a visual impairment, which you would then require glasses for. It's about how the brain is receiving and interpreting, reacting to that information, so the sound or the visual feedback. So it's more about the brain's interpretation than it is about the actual sense itself. So if we watch this little video, I don't know how many of you have come across Chris Packham before. Packham, he's a really interesting sort of TV presenter who has recently started doing a lot more about his own experience with autism. He calls it Asperger's. Nowadays, that's the diagnosis he received. We now sort of refer to autism as a spectrum. So we've sort of removed that label of Asperger's or high or low functioning. It's now just this spectrum. But if we listen to him sort of talk about his experience and of the sensory world.
I'm meeting an expert in autistic hypersensitivity, Dr. Luke Bearden.
He's chosen to meet me here at the Moor Market. It's an indoor market, I can see that, and it looks pretty busy. Not necessarily in terms of people, but in terms of sensory stimuli of all kinds. I can already smell it from outside. Oh well, here goes. Oh, God.
Nearly all autistic people report being unusually responsive to at least one of the senses. Bright lights, temperature, unexpected noises, texture and taste can all be challenging.
You must be Luke.
Hi Chris,
hello.
Welcome. I feel like I should apologise in advance for dragging you here.
Apologise.
I feel like you're taking one for the team.
Luke is a senior lecturer and autism researcher at Sheffield Hallam University. He's dedicated his career to speaking to autistic people about their experiences.
Why is my sensory experience here so radically different from a non-autistic person?
What's happening is your primary senses, whether they're good or bad or indifferent, are picking up all of that external stimuli, and what happens then is what I call the filtering process. The brain takes that sensory information, filters it, and then what the non-autistic person ends up with is a conscious understanding of the sensory environment.
Okay, so are you saying that for non-autistic people they are able to block some of this out?
A huge amount of it out. They're actually not aware of certain sounds or smells or sights and so on, whereas the autistic person is aware of all of it.
But how does that work mechanically? How is that wiring different in my brain?
There's no definitive answer, which makes the whole sensory side of things A, fascinating, and B, extraordinarily complex.
Should we go for a little walk?
Absolutely.
To continue to stimulate our senses.
Being unable to filter out this onslaught of information can have significant consequences for autistic people. Someone hypersensitive to smell might vomit at the faintest whiff of perfume. Someone hypersensitive to sound might find it challenging to leave home.
That maybe somewhat dark side of the sensory world needs to be embraced and understood and accepted as well. I know individuals, for example, who have not eaten at school because the smell of the cafeteria is enough that they cannot digest food. I know young adults who have ended up in anorexia wards, not because they're anorexic, but because they have sensory aversions to certain types of food, and that behaviour's been misunderstood in these examples as anorexia, as opposed to understanding the person from an autistic perspective.
Okay, let's leave the fish.
After the stress of the market, I want to take Luke somewhere I feel more comfortable, to explore one of the contradictions of autism. Why I, like so many, seek out specific sensations.
When I go into the supermarket, ideally, I'd like to be able to block stuff out. And I do block it out by simply not going. When I come here, I want everything to come in. The sound of the trees in the wind, the sound of the trees in the rain. And to know them differently, for me, brings me joy. It's comfort it brings me.
I think what you're describing is a conscious effort of sensory seeking. If you identified something that soothes you, gives you joy, gives you comfort, that you're then going to be hyper aware of that. There's absolutely categorically no denying that some autistic people's sensory experiences are the best thing to them about being autistic. I've heard people saying, I feel so sorry for people who don't experience the sensory joy that I experience by sniffing the dog or listening to the noise of geese on brand new snow. So there's this extraordinary juxtaposition on the one hand of sensory joy and on the other hand sensory distress, sometimes within the same individual.
So I really love that concept of sensory joy. I think so often in these sort of trainings and conversations that you may have with therapists and EHCPs, and when we're talking about all of this, we so often focus on the challenges, and that's because they're really apparent to us. But actually, they often come coupled with sensory joy, and I love what he was saying there about that experience, and it often is the same individual experiences huge amounts of sensory joy, but then there are just these sort of areas where there's also this sensory overwhelm. The way that I like breaking it down to, if you think about our neurotypical sort of brain, you've almost got your brain receives that information from your senses and from the environment, and it's like you've got two doorways effectively. One is like your subconscious, and one is your conscious mind. So through that subconscious door, you might receive information about what's happening in your environment. You might, on a subconscious level, make decisions around that, but it's not necessarily coming fully into your conscious. And then you've got that conscious side. So if you think, for instance, about the chair that you're sitting on, that information was going into your subconscious. You weren't recognizing that pressure of where you were sitting, but now that I've said it, it's come into that conscious part of your brain. So it's about us, that's us being able to process. Some of it goes into the subconscious, some comes into our conscious. But I think, when we think about people with autism and sensory processing differences, it's that everything is coming into the conscious. So we'll talk about it a little bit later, but the environment. So he was talking about that fish market and the market in itself, and the smell of the fish area, the packing of the boxes, all that information was coming into the conscious, and none was dripping into the subconscious. We might have gone into that market, sort of initially smelt the fish, it come into our conscious part of our brain, but actually we'd have got used to it and been able to kind of carry on with our day-to-day, with our shopping and conversations we were having, and that sense of it being really a strong smell would have slipped more into our subconscious brain. It's almost like two doorways. But as he said, it's so difficult to sort of look at sensory processing because the anatomy, that you can't see these differences, their experiences. So I'm not sure if you've heard about the sort of the cup analogy, but it links to what we were talking about here about you can be sort of hypersensitive or hyposensitive a lot of the time. We can kind of start seeing our young people and individuals with autism sort of having these different areas. So that's kind of like being hypersensitive to things, and hypo, and sort of seeking, and what we tend to see here is, if you look at those cups at the bottom, you could have a really small cup. So some people have different sizes of sensory information and experiences that they're able to cope with. That's kind of what this cup analogy means. So if somebody has a very small cup, they may feel overwhelmed and quickly by certain sensory inputs, which is known as hypersensitive. If someone has a much larger cup, they need a lot more sensory input to reach that just right, so that the kind of regulated level of sensory regulation, the calm and alert state, and that's hyposensitive. So that's where you start seeing those and depending on the environment, you can have a different size cup for different environments. So home and school could be different. You can also have a different sized cup for different senses. So sound is a good example. Actually, you can have a small cup for noises, so not liking lots of noises in the environment, but actually a big sensory cup that sort of larger cup for movement and vestibular seeking. Those are sort of some easier ways to break this down. Also, the sort of the oral element, the crunchy snacks, the kind of seeking lots more in the mouth, those sorts of things, you can start seeing this difference in the size of the cup. We'll watch this other video. I've got quite a few videos for us this evening, because I just really like representing and being able to sort of present how it could look. It's quite a nice way. I know lots of this information isn't completely new to you. A lot of you will know a lot of this information. So videos are quite a nice way of how can we see the uncomfort that maybe is being felt, because it's not always easy for us as working with our young people in these settings to sort of pick up on all the nuances and the elements that might be happening. Sometimes we sort of forget maybe what the experience was on the way into our classroom before our class has even begun, and we think they've come in and we can't understand where their attention is that day. But it's trying to sort of unpick it all and think about those cups. So throughout the day, that cup is gradually getting more and more full. The journey, waking up, did they have breakfast, did they not, how was the bus in, or their journey in, how was walking to your classroom, how was register, how was going on to the next classroom, the hallways, needing the toilet, going to the bathroom. There's all these elements throughout the day that fill that cup gradually. So we will just watch this video about this boy's hallway experience. So, I mean, I'm sure you've all seen children looking like Adam there in the corridor. That sort of sense of stopping still and being overwhelmed by what's going on around them. I love particularly the sound of the swishing ponytail. It's all the things that happen in people moving around that we don't necessarily recognise could be overwhelming. That ponytail was not only, there was a sound, but it was visually a lot. Could it have touched him? There was lots happening there. So I think, if we think about this boy, he was having a really lovely time there, touching the lockers, and he was in his own space where he was enjoying that, the sensations. And it quickly moved to feeling uncomfortable. It felt quite stressful. As soon as that bell went, I could sort of feel that overwhelm building and that sense of stress. So that's then the experience that, you're going to want to start to avoid. And I'm sure you have children that don't want to be in the corridors, that you maybe have to make adjustments for, or that the corridor is where challenges arise. I think, we talked at the beginning about the joy of sensations as well. If we have an experience, a sensory experience that as we're processing, it's creating joy for us. I've got a pair of corduroy trousers, and I I always catch myself if I'm having conversation. If I was wearing them now, I know one of my hands would be sort of stroking the side of the trousers. I don't do it in any other trousers, but there's a part of me when I'm sort of thinking or working. It's not even on a conscious level, but I'll be playing with the pocket on those trousers. So I'm seeking that. I'm enjoying that sensation. I'm looking for more, and I'm sort of looking for more all day that I'll be wearing those trousers. And that, if you were somebody that hated that sensation, you would avoid those trousers. You wouldn't want to sort of touch them. You probably wouldn't even want to own them. So it's that level of seeking something or avoiding it. And there are so many different elements to this. So if we do a little experiment now, we will just do this quickly. So, where you're sat, if you, this is going to look at our vestibular system. So I mentioned before, just on the corner here of this image, you've got the anatomy of the inner ear. And inside there, you've got, as I say, there's a pocket of fluid and some little hairs. And as you move your head, that detects movement that's happening. It detects movement in your whole body, but your head's a really good way of sort of us playing this experiment. So sitting upright now, if you slowly turn your head side to side, as if you were sort of shaking no with your head, just do it 3 times, really slowly. So backwards and forwards. Actually, there's a photo in that right-hand corner. So you're just moving your head side to side. So that sensation for me was fine. I was aware that I was moving it, but that was absolutely fine. If you now do it fast, so you do it 3 times over, but really quickly. So I'll do it with I won't talk because I'm doing it. So what tends to happen is after you've done it faster, so for me, I had to take a little breath before I started talking. And now that I've started talking, I don't know about you, having had that experience, it was quite quick. That quickness is sort of trying to settle in my brain. I know when I've sort of done this before, for some people it caused like a little bit of a headache, or their eyes were like a bit achy. It raised their heart rate. Right then, I know my experience just then was I needed a moment before I could talk again. My eyes did feel a little bit, I was looking at the screen as I did it, so when I stopped, my eyes felt almost an ache. And this is what we start talking about dysregulation. So that first 3 movements that we did, our brain was happily able to process that sensation. There was no challenge there. The second 3 was too quick, it was unexpected, and actually my brain wasn't able to process that, and that made me feel a bit dysregulated. It made me feel, it took me a moment before I was able to speak. Once I was speaking, actually I didn't have a good rhythm of breath in the same way, so I was dysregulated. It only took a few moments for it to come right again. But that was my body, and I don't know, what happened for you in that experience, but that's that sensation of feeling a little bit dysregulated, and that's just on like a minute level. So if we think about that boy in that class, on that corridor, sorry, I realized I just moved on slide. If you think about that boy in the corridor there, I mentioned about a slight feeling in my eye. I'd said before that other people have sort of said that it made them feel dizzy. Dysregulation causes all of those feelings. So that's like dizzy, they're increasing heart rate. And that's what's happening for our children. That's sort of how they may be feeling when they're dysregulated in that class space. We're going to watch 2 videos now back to back. One is around it's the same creators as that first video, so sort of sensory processing within a classroom, and then a teacher's way of dealing with it.
matin avec le passé composé, okay? So this morning we're going to start with the past tense.
So just because of time, I'm just going to whiz this on to, because it's quite a slow video. I'm going to bring it to the middle, if it lets me. So I think I moved it on so you couldn't quite see what she'd done. But here you go, she had put tennis balls on each of the classroom chairs. So what that meant for, I didn't see the boy's name, but what that meant for this child in this video was actually that one noise that was what put him over the edge to sort of be in overwhelm. And you heard his breathing was sort of out of breath. He had his fingers in his ears. There was no way he was in a state able to learn and ready to work. Her doing this sort of very simple but quite time-consuming strategy really helped him access. And even though the other sounds were happening, there was still the bell, there was still the chatter. This one sort of extra element was removed, and that helped him be able to focus. So just because of time, I want to be able to sort of get to questions at the end. I'm always too ambitious with what I can fit in. So we won't watch this one, but it's a similar concept in terms of the lunch hall. So if we look at this, again, with this activity, we won't spend too long on this. But if we look at this boy here sitting on the pink chair, he is experiencing lots of sensory experiences within this classroom. And if he was one of your children who has autism and struggles with that sensory processing, what in this area, if you pop into the chat, or as I say, in terms of time, I might just carry on. But actually, I'm going to just to sort of carry on with this, but the things that he may be having overwhelm with here are that, some people are typing, some people are writing with pens. There's different noises there. There's the lights, there's the windows, there's the smell of people's perfume or deodorant or lack of in some scenarios. There's his actual trying to think about his work. So there's a lot here that he's having to process, and a lot here that he might be becoming overwhelmed with. For us as his education support, there's a lot we could also put in place to help him get the most out of this learning experience and actually be able to achieve here. So for instance, we could think about his seated position so that he's not sat. So actually, if they've done that here, he's not, if he was to sit where that girl in glasses was, that's where everybody's walking past. It's where the most amount of disruption may be. He's actually sat on a quieter side. So that's better for him. He maybe has already had a movement break before he's come in. He maybe used sound cancelling earpods through the corridors. Maybe he's allowed gum in lessons, but not That's often a thing that he can have it when he's learning, but not in the corridor areas. There's lots of sort of things that he maybe has had. He's got the iPad down next to him. Maybe that's got a visual timetable or a timer on it that's sort of supporting him to sort of manage what he's doing there. So these are just some ideas that may support him in that sort of setting. So I talked earlier about that just right level a few times, and also we talked about the size of cups. You've sort of got this point in the middle, particularly when we talk about self-regulation, but it can also be sort of around the challenge of a task. So you can have that kind of low level, be under responsive and kind of less alert, not notice things in the environment, not notice when their name is being called. There's sort of that lower level. Or there's that overreactive. So having like a really sort of over responsive, struggling to focus, quick to sort of frustration, hyper alert. So both of these areas, support from kind of calming strategies or movement strategies will help bring to that just right level in the middle. So as I say, just time-based, I'm going to whiz on and do questions at the end. So what can you do in schools to sort of support with regulation? A lot of you will have heard of zones of regulation. I know it can be and has been used in lots of primary schools. There's now a lot more resources. These are all resources that have come from the website. They've created a lot more in the last few months available on their website for teens and adolescents. This is kind of like the adolescent logo in the middle here, which is really lovely. And I much prefer how it's, rather than it being this sort of the linear approach, actually it's a wheel, and it's the same concept. No zone is a bad zone. It's not naughty. But these are some ideas on ways that you can bring the zones into for older children. So the top left is using sports personnel or sort of people that they are role models, and then finding different facial expressions to represent them. Could be characters, could be celebrities, could be whoever it is that they choose. On the right at the top there's simply coloured highlighters, just being able to sort of have a blank piece of paper they can indicate to you and use it as an opportunity to go and have a movement break or use one of the strategies that you've agreed within your class, or that's like a paint strips. Then down on the left here, this is a really lovely learning tool. You can use it for lots of different things, the feeling wheel, and it just sort of helps expand vocabulary around feelings. Or you could have, I love this idea, a Google form. So, how so much more tech is used now within classrooms, and actually having a wall poster could feel a little bit more juvenile and more sort of public. So this is a more private way that you could use it. These are some sort of regulation tools for your older kids. So we talked, I mentioned earlier about sugar-free chewing gum. Lots of schools won't allow chewing gum. That's absolutely, fine and right in the playground, around the corridors. You might have some children that you agree as a regulation strategy that gum, when they're at their table, is okay. They have to spit it out. They're not allowed to share it. There's strategies around how it has to be removed before they finish that learning task. But it's actually a really good way of sort of supporting attention, supporting concentration. There's so many apps now available to support mindfulness and sort of regulation for older children. You might, the top left there, those ear pods, a lot of children as they get older don't want to wear the big ear defenders. These are like little sound cancelling ear pods. They're called Loop. They're really, 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 really good for those older children. And then sort of the fidget toys that sort of require concentration. So things like Rubik's cubes that sort of support that ability to tune into a task. That could also be journaling. There's lots of things that you could sort of do. Again, on this left-hand corner here, that's one of the newer resources for the adolescents when you're looking about zones. Zones also has created a tools kit for sort of teens and tweens, 20s. And then CAMS has got several areas that I'd like to direct you to. One is their apps. They've got a huge array of apps that kind of link from anything to regulation. There's lots of apps for self-harm, for anxiety, and lots more. So sort of almost any challenge that you might be having with your children from a regulation perspective, there will be an app there. And whether that's a suggestion for families to have at home, or whether actually it's something that they can come and do in a safe space instead of, a burst of playtime, or there might be points in the day where you think actually it's better for this person to be in doing one of these sort of strategies. There's also a huge amount of videos that sort of talk, that are teen, adolescent and child focused videos that sort of support with understanding of anxiety and our fight flight response and that reaction. Then here there's just sort of mindful colouring and different resources. I mentioned about there's a Zones app as well. So the last area just to cover on for the last minute or two is around Level Ups. This is a different programme that has been used or built by an OT and an adult with autism. It's called Level Up, and the concept is that you power up or you power down. So it's a little bit more teen-friendly language. I very much talk around consoles and TVs and powering on and powering off, and that sort of language that seems a bit easier. They've got a huge amount of resources that's free online on their website. This is just sort of to say a bit about them. On the left is Lara, I think her name was Laura. I'm getting that confused with Amy. That was it. Sorry, Lara is Zones. And they have sort of come together in a way of sort of how you can support people with ASD not feel broken. So there's sometimes the language in although we don't intend to, the language in Zones can be a little bit it can be easy to encourage children to be in the green zone because we're at school and we want them to be learning, but actually it's really supporting the fact that all zones are okay, but you don't slip into that trap with Level Up. You just have energy up or energy down. There's no bad zone, good zone. I mean, there's not meant to be in zones of regulation either, but this is sort of a emotion chart. Or it's not even about emotions, it's just about feelings and energy within your body. So at the bottom you're asleep, and at the top you're maxed out, you're a bit frenzied. And then they've sort of built ways that you can build strategies based on that. So it has a similar concept. You have your level up, sorry, your energy meter here, and if you need to power up, so I love how they have what energy is needed on the left here. The blue side is what energy do I need. So I don't know, maybe you're about to play a game, a team sport, and actually you kind of need to be a bit amped up because you're about to, represent your school in a netball match or something. But actually your energy is feeling a bit sleepy. So that child or young person would need to power up their energy. Vice versa, you're about to go with your class into the library. You need to be settled and calm, but actually you are feeling a bit maxed out, so you need to power down. So you can sort of build these again based on things they like. So this one on the side is about dinosaurs, and then have in there the strategies that can support them as well. As I say, there's absolutely loads of their resources. They're all free online. I will just close the PowerPoint now, and then we can kind of talk through any questions that might come up and where I've come to sort of the hour here. I'll send out a copy of these resources, because at the bottom here, these are just some more sort of videos and TED Talks and things that are really useful ways of sort of learning a bit more about level up and these other areas. How have I stopped sharing? There we go. So I'm not sure if there's any questions. I'll definitely sort of, I will make sure I send this PowerPoint through to you. And also the Level Up, particularly their website, is not the most user-friendly. You've really got to search through for the resources. So I'll send through the energy meter and the power up, power down strategies, just so you've got them. I know it's not, nobody has 5 minutes in the day, so then they're available to you. And also there's some, as I say, those new resources that are on the Zones website. I'm aware that I have gone a little bit over time there, so if there are any questions, do unmute yourselves and jump in now. If not, I will stop the recording actually,